The Bill and Kelly Show is recorded at Studio A at Executive Suite Squared in beautiful Hammond, Indiana. Now, here's Bill and Kelly. Hello, welcome to the Bill and Kelly Show. Today our guest is Hal Slager, who is a candidate for District 15 House of Representatives in the state of Indiana. So welcome to our show. Did I get your name right?
You did. Thank you, Bill.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on our show. The whole idea of having you on is just to share with people that may not be familiar with you, although you served in the District 15 as a representative before. As we talked before the show, there's a lot of people coming over from Illinois, a lot of new people coming in, and they may not know you.
Indeed.
So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, where you grew up and where you went to school, and why you got involved in state government?
Well, I grew up in Porter County and ended up going to school in Indianapolis at Butler University. And made my way back here to help with a family business in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would be a short stint. Turned out to be about 30 years. Those things happen. In the process, I got interested in both real estate and politics. You know how those things go. Something's happening in town and you get involved and one thing leads to another. And so I ended up being on the Schererville Town Council for 10 years. And I had made the decision after the third election that I was not going to run again. That was enough. And about that time they redrew the districts for the legislative district. Now previously, District 15 was 90 miles long. That stretched from Brookston, Indiana, all the way into Schererville. Largely to, well, it's gerrymandered at its worst. And so when it got redrawn, the focus was to try to create a community of interest. And so I like to say that for all intents and purposes, District 15 is now largely the Lake Central School Corporation District. Now it encompasses a little bit more or less, but that's kind of a quick way to look at it. All of Dyer and Schererville, parts of Griffith and St. John. So when they redrew that district, I realized this was an area that I could represent. Schererville, was half the district, and I already was representing Schererville. So it was a pretty easy segue in that regard to jump in.
So that was when again? When you?
Well, let's see. I was. I think it was in 2002. I ran for town council. In 2012, that I ran for state representative, and I held that position for 6 years.
Right. So during that period of time, what initiatives did you start as a rep?
Well, the first thing that had been percolating for a while was the desire for the town of Griffith to extract themselves from Calumet Township.
Yes.
There was quite a real divide, frankly, where the Calumet Township line folks met the St. John Township line, and the property values would jump because the taxes were so much higher on one side than the other, and that's for any number of reasons, but that's what was going on. It was a couple $100 in tax versus $50 in tax, or whatever it was, something inconsequential. And so that year we got a bill on the table. Previously, the leaders in Griffith had been trying to get an amendment on a bill, and they realized this wasn't working, and then we needed to get something on the table that would really get the discussion going. That's what we did. We got a bill started and got it all the way through to give them a mechanism to extract themselves from Calumet Township, which has finally now taken place.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, I remember those conversations got heated, and a lot of people got involved in that conversation, and whether they became a part of North Township or
Right.
whatever it seemed, and they had to pick a place. They had a deadline to get an agreement with the township.
That's correct. And,
So-
and they had to be accepted. And so anyway, that kind of got me started. And what was interesting about that is the number of people and stakeholders that we had to work with. And that kind of set me up for what was another big project was the train expansion. And that was really kind of funny too, because I remember speaking with Bill Hahn of the RDA, and he's telling me about the double track work, and that they've got all 4 counties on board with how they're going to help share the funding. And I just casually said, well, Bill, I'd like to see those agreements. And he says, what do you mean? I said, can you send me the agreements? Oh, well, we don't have any paperwork. I said, well, then you've got nothing. Because until something is passed in a public meeting, you're really out there. So that began the process of working through what was needed with each county. They all had different needs and expectations, and what we could do and what we couldn't do. And in that process, when we got all the county officials in agreement on what they needed and what we could do, then they just simply told their state representatives how they wanted them to vote. And it was just a very effective process.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So, yeah, when you first started the process, there was just handshake agreements, verbal agreements.
In public life, handshake agreements are not good.
No, they are not, especially in the public sector. No, absolutely not. So that's interesting, because that's yet another controversial project, the double tracking. And while we're on it, why don't you give us your view on that, the whole project itself, whether it's actually going to bring in the money that everyone hopes by this making more efficient transportation through Northwest Indiana into Chicago, or is it a bad idea? What's your opinion on that?
Well, we have to base it on what the professional studies showed, and it was dramatic. The expectation at that time was that when the rail was operating, we could expect to bring in about 175 million additional income dollars into Lake County, just like the other counties. 175 million more dollars of income. That's in workers' pockets, that's in business pockets, that's more restaurants and hardware stores and whatever the case may be that spring up because of that, generates a greater economy. And of course there are those, even on my side of the aisle, that were of the belief that, well, these kind of projects are always a boondoggle. They will always require some level of subsidy, because you can never pay for them at the fare box. And that's absolutely true. That is correct. But we looked at what that disparity was, and at the time we were figuring about $5 million a year. And so you weigh it. A $5 million cost versus $175 million more in revenue, in income coming into the area. You make that deal every day. And even if the studies were off by half, it's still a strong deal in that regard. So what we did, what was more interesting, was when we created the transit development districts around each station, because we wanted to see development not just in Munster, but along the entire line. And in that process, we created a mechanism to keep revenue dollars in that area, like a TIF, so that it could be leveraged and used to develop in areas that might not normally get development. And so when we added that component, then the federal folks realized we could really leverage up the federal dollars too, because then it went from a $700-800 million construction project to a $2 billion economic development interest.
Hmm.
And so that's why that got the federal money, frankly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, say with what you want, but you after you develop those areas, you have housing, new companies coming to, primarily retail to help supply
Right.
goods and services. Those people are going to be riding the rail.
And I would also want to say, some of the detractors would say, why are we trying to ship our people to Illinois to those higher paying jobs?
Mhm.
That was never the goal. We're going to attract people into Indiana that may be working in Chicago, but now they have access to living here and spending their dollars here.
Well, now with the COVID, that's the inertia is there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's.
I'd say it, but I mean, now we have people moving over here for sports reasons. There's
Sure.
people moving over from Illinois because they're not opening up their athletic departments in their high schools, and I debate whether that's right or wrong. It's still a reality.
That may be the case, certainly, but
Mhm.
for the most part, I remember reading the Crane's Chicago Business article where they were talking.
Okay, so let's talk about other items that you would like to communicate on your platform that you hope to do if you're reelected and the new representative for District 15.
Certainly. Well, one of the issues that I've been working on for several years is trying to identify the disparity we have in Medicaid funding where it crosses state lines. This issue was brought to me by the people at the Northwest Indiana Cancer Kids Foundation, where we have children, when they get sick, they get really sick. And children that are on Medicaid, and by the way, most people don't realize that half of our Hoosier children are Medicaid patients. It's hard to imagine, but it's not just Northwest Indiana. It's the whole state. So many children do not have insurance coverage, and so they're Medicaid patients. And unfortunately, when we cross state lines, doesn't matter whether it's Indiana Medicaid or Illinois Medicaid, there's a funding problem. Keep in mind, Medicaid is a federally funded program, partially by the state, mostly by the federal government, but administered at the state level. So it's subject to all kinds of restrictions and rules. This is the swamp, in my opinion, trying to work your way through what's happening in these big bureaucratic agencies. When these children get sick, and it's an emergency, of course, the Chicago hospitals have to take them. But in most cases, there's something wrong with the child, and they end up going to Lurie or Riley down in Indianapolis. So it's a 150-mile trip one way and then back. And then these parents that are just trying to make ends meet, young families, maybe other children, then they realize the child's really ill and they're going to be there a while, and it's just a very difficult situation because they're so far from home. I'm trying to work on a solution to this so that these families cannot have to travel so far and get, world-class care within 25 miles of home. And interestingly, the same problem exists not just in the Chicago market, but also the Louisville and Cincinnati markets for Hoosier children, where we're having to cross state lines. And working through that funding disparity is something that I think we need to do. Now, we have great hospitals otherwise, but we don't have pediatric hospitals in Northwest Indiana. And so if we can come up with a solution to this, I think it creates a real benefit for Northwest Indiana. There's no need for us to try to build a pediatric hospital here because that investment's already done. But a little investment on our part will help draw more services right into Northwest Indiana so that the ongoing care and maintenance issues that many of these children face, they wouldn't have to even go into Chicago. That could be partnered with hospitals
Northwest
right
Indiana.
here in Northwest Indiana.
Right. And benefit other areas of Indiana that are suffering the same problem.
Indeed.
Right. And so moving on here, what other areas are you concerned about as an Indiana resident that you want to go down and try to fix?
Well, I can't tell you how many times people have brought to my attention issues they have with family members or friends and mental illness. This is something that strikes all of us, if not in our direct family, but close by. Illness. It seems that every family is touched by this, whether it's in their direct family or not immediate family, but close by, friends. Somebody's affected by issues relating to mental health. And unfortunately, we don't do a very good job in the country, much less the state, on how we handle that. And what makes it worse is that the front line of that often ends up being the criminal justice system. And it's just unfortunate because then these people, rather than getting the help they need, they're in the criminal justice system and the police are having to deal with it, and then there's legal issues involved. There's a program called Crisis Intervention Team Training that got started in Fort Wayne, and they've had great success with this, where the police have been trained on how to deal with these kinds of offenders, whatever it may be, and getting them the help before it escalates into a criminal offense, and keeping them out of the criminal justice system. Now, I was a part of passing legislation that allowed for a framework and some funding for this at the state level. I would just like to help motivate and work with the sheriff and maybe do some testing of that with agencies that might have some interest. I'm not in favor of mandates, so nobody needs to worry about that. But I think this is something that could really benefit our police agencies if they were to give it a try, and benefit families to get their family members help and resources before they commit a crime, rather than waiting until afterward.
So this is a way, for instance, law enforcement individuals would have a way of getting people the help they need, and maybe whether it's a line that they have direct access to a facility saying we need to bring someone over that is exhibiting some
Sure.
issues. And with that also is, and one thing that's been directly linked to mental illness is substance abuse, which is another growing problem in both Lake County, Porter County. And so let's talk about that a bit, because that it seems like if we could solve one, it will start bringing down the other. Would you agree?
You're absolutely right. People have no idea the scope of this problem. In just the last 10 years, Family Services budget has grown nearly $500 million. And it's largely due to taking children out of drug homes. Maybe they're taking drugs, making drugs, or selling drugs. Either way, we're trying to get those children out of that environment, and it's at a great cost. Think about it, $500 million, how that money could be used if we weren't spending it there. Half the budget goes to K-12 education. That'd be an extra $250 million. We could spend tens of millions of dollars on dealing with substance abuse and helping with people get resources that they need. And so there absolutely, there's a tie there. And we all know that there's a tie with substance abuse and mental illness as well. But this cost of substance abuse, it hits us at multiple levels. Even those not abusing, they're abusing by breaking the law.
Right.
And we've passed legislation to limit access to certain elements so that they can't be making some of these drugs, and that's helped tremendously. But all of it is still costing us a lot of money that could be better spent.
Yeah. So I mean, eventually, we reduce the amount is being taken away from other units that need the money, and it is a growing, escalating problem in this Tri-County area, all the way into LaPorte, Porter, and Lake. So what other areas do you want to work on as our representative?
Well, one of the things I've talked about has to do with an energy policy. All of our energy companies in Indiana are all trying to get out of the coal-fired business, which is fine and good on many levels. However, when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing or the wind's blowing too hard, we're going to have to be buying energy from out of state. And maybe that's coal-fired for all we know. But what bothers me is if we don't have a dependable resource of energy in our state, we become vulnerable. An economy is based, a strong economy is based on affordable, easy to access energy. And I'm sure that the folks at all these energy companies would say that they've got that covered. I would just like to see that we come together as a state with a plan so that we're all working with the same understanding.
And we're not scrambling around when something happens where we need to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to fear monger. I'm not saying that's. Let's plan in advance.
Well, you and I still remember the oil embargo.
Yeah.
And we had ships off the coast that filled full of oil, but we had mile-long lines going into gas stations. And, since then, we have not really developed a cohesive, really dependable plan for what happens.
Yes.
Plan B is all we need, is something that what happens if there is a catastrophic event that disrupts our energy.
In government, we tend to be more reactionary than thinking in advance, and so maybe it's heresy, but let's think in advance a little bit.
Well, it seems like a novel effort since those ships were off in 1972. Was that 72, 73?
Careful, you're dating us.
Oh yeah. Oh, listen, I feel dated every time I get up. So it, oh man, those for those you millennials out there, we're talking about, if you look up in your history books right around the Nixon era when we had the disagreement with the oil cartel,
OPEC.
the OPEC, and things didn't go well. You guys complained about when they reduced gas prices and having to wait a little bit longer. Those, I remember the people taking gas cans, filling it up. Oh man. Well, this has been helpful. Before we close up the show, is there anything else you want to share with all these listeners and voters out there? Maybe put yourself in their shoes, and maybe some helpful information that would let them know why they should vote for you.
Sure. Well, as I've talked about earlier, I have experience. I'm known for getting things done. And in this particular case, I have my own business. Doing this part-time fits in very well for me. I don't have designs for anything else. This is not a career builder for me or a resume builder or whatever. I just want to get some things done that are really important for Northwest Indiana. I didn't quite get it done 2 years ago, and I'd like to finish the job.
Yeah. You heard it here. So this has been very informative, and I hope you all out there have gotten information that, and by all means, if your listeners have not voted yet, make a plan to vote. There is no more crucial time in our history than this election to vote for the people that you feel need to be in office. And that's the reason why we did this, so you have the information out there in hands and make proper decision. And we want to thank you for coming on and giving this information for our listeners and viewers that are ready to vote.
Certainly. It's been a fun interview. I appreciate you inviting me.
We appreciate you coming on. So with that, we'll wish you a safe and happy day, and we'll say goodbye for now.